let's talk about creating a risk assessment. More specifically, let's talk about a risk-focused risk assessment. The risk-focused risk assessment spotlights your institution's risk profile and lets you focus on your real risk. It lets you concentrate your monitoring efforts where the real risk is, freeing you from frequent monitoring of customers and accounts that are low risk. So let's get risk focused. How do we do that? The first thing we need is data, and that's often the hardest part for small institutions. Each institution and core processor collects and stores data in a unique way. The trick is to get all that data you need out of your system. That being said, most institutions have some kind of report writing system or BSA surveillance system that permits outputting account transaction data. The goal is to build a risk assessment data file that combines the bank's customer and account transactions with transaction data from what I call related service suppliers. That would include your wire transfers, remote deposit capture, mobile banking app, and online banking apps. Once you have all that data in hand, you can start the regulatory required risk-focused risk assessment. So now that we have data, let's talk about exactly how we get risk-focused. The first thing that has to be done is to analyze your entire customer and account base and determine where your real risk is. For example, my mother-in-law has 2 accounts with her bank, her checking account and her IRA. She writes between 12 and 20 checks per month, plus she also has 7 pre-authorized payments and 2 direct deposits. Her total deposit activity would never exceed $4,500 per month. On the other hand, her next door neighbor owns 2 quick shop stores that sell gas, groceries, phone cards, and prepaid cash cards. He also has what looks like a leased ATM machine in each store, and he sells money remittance to people with relatives in non-US countries. His store generates more than $4,500 in cash a day. Of the 2 customers, who do you think represent the highest BSA risk? My mother-in-law or her neighbor with the 2 quick shops? The goal of your risk assessment is to find and segregate all the customers and accounts into groups and make a decision about their relative BSA AML risk. When you've done that, you have your risk focus. We have a standard we can use to focus on account risk. This is what the FFIEC BSA exam manual has to say. The development of the BSA AML risk assessment generally involves the identification of specific risk categories. For example, products, services, customers, and geographic locations that are unique to the bank, and an analysis of the information identified to better assess the risks within these specific risk categories. This means that your risk assessment needs to have a very granular development. It needs to include not only account transaction details, but the type of customers you have and where the account is located. Let's take a look at an example and I'll show you what I mean. First of all, I'd like to say this is only an example to illustrate a point. It is not meant to present a risk rating rule. Notice we have 3 kinds of checking accounts. For each of those, there's an A and a B example. We'll assume that they all start out with the same amount of risk, in this case, that risk being 1. But as we add on account attributes, the risks increase. Let's look first at the personal checking account. Notice how A has a lower risk score than B. A is 2 and B is 4. Well, what's the difference? 2 things: the amount of activity and where the account is located, a high-risk geography. Now let's look at the commercial checking account examples. A has a 6 score, B has a 10. Again, what's the difference? Notice that B is a high volume account that is located outside the institution's market and inside a high-risk geography. Perhaps it's a federally defined high-intensity financial crime area a HIFCA, or a high-intensity drug trafficking area, a HIDA. Plus, the account owner is in a higher risk category. Maybe they're a pawn shop or an antiquities dealer. In addition, B has two high-risk capabilities: remote deposit capture and wire service origination. Now let's look at the nonprofit examples. The nonprofit B example has more risky features than example A. B is located out of the institution's market and is owned by an individual who is classified as higher risk. Here's the main point. Each attribute adds increments of risk. Whereas all the accounts in the grid started with the same risk, as attributes were added, the risk scores increase. This table also shows you why you cannot assume that one checking account is the same as another. You have to know your customer and what their activity is about before you can classify the risk. And you can't classify the risk until you have all your customer and account data. You'll recall we said a risk assessment segments high-risk accounts from lower-risk accounts. When you group your high-risk accounts separately from all the other accounts, you know where the risk is, and you know where to focus your attention. Oh, and let me add this quick note. Many institutions are still relying on the Appendix J of the exam manual for the bulk of their risk assessment. As examiners and auditors will tell you, App J is helpful, but it doesn't cut it when it comes to providing a granular, risk-focused risk assessment. Okay, now we have the data, and we have analyzed all of our customer and accounts. What's the next step? Is to consolidate all of our account data into one place and then isolate the higher risk products. Here's an example smart sheet for you to examine. According to our hypothetical, the bank has about 46,000 deposit accounts, and the dollar total and deposit portfolio is about $1.5 billion. However, the risk assessment categorization you have performed has identified almost 4,900 accounts as higher risk. Those 4,900 accounts represent about $109 million in the deposit portfolio. Let's look closer at some of the identified risk. Note there are 2,850 customer types that the rules classify as high risk. They may be cash-intensive businesses or pawn shops, auto dealers, or any other of the high-risk classifications. And notice there are 175 accounts in a high-risk geography like a HIDA or a HIFCA. These customers and accounts have other attributes that contribute to high risk. Remember, this is a hypothetical example to illustrate how you assemble a risk assessment. As the saying goes, your mileage may vary. Nevertheless, what you're looking at is a 5,000-foot view of a risk-focused risk assessment. Looking at it this way, the BSA officer knows exactly where to focus the institution's monitoring efforts, which is not at all 46,000 accounts, but instead the 4,900 high-risk accounts. As a practical matter, this institution should be looking at these 4,900 accounts much more frequently than the other 41,000 lower risk accounts. That is to say, the institution's risk focus and the concentration of the institution's BSA AML resources is upon those 4,900 accounts. I hope you've gained a better understanding of what the BSA AML risk-focused risk assessment is all about and how you can apply the risk-focused principles to your institution. If you have questions or need to pick our brain, don't hesitate to contact us. We'll be glad to help. We thank you for watching the video, and I look forward to speaking with you in person soon.